Today we're going to have a quick look at Phd2, just for newbies, just the buttons, what they do, and how to fine-tune your guiding a little bit. So the first thing we want to do is connect the mount and your guide camera. So we go down here to connect equipment, up here to manage profiles and go new using wizard. Now in this section you'll put in your guide camera. In this instance I'm using the simulator. So it puts the pixel size in. You need to put your the focal length of your guide scope. Okay, mine's a 60mm guide scope, so it's 240. So that's the focal length of your guide scope, not of your telescope. Next, connect your mount. I'm going to go on camera because I'm just doing this as a simulation, not actually connected to the telescope. So you would connect whatever mount you happen to have there. Auxiliary mount. I'll connect that one. Yep. And this is for your optics. If you have any automatic focusing and that sort of thing, we don't need that. Don't want to build a dark library this time, but we want to auto restore calibration, and just name the profile. So simulate 2 ish. Okay, that pops up this window here. Now to do any of the setups, you just click on this one here to set your camera up. If you need to change the it may be on 12-bit, you might want to put it on 16, or it might be on 8, you might want to move it up. And the same thing here with your mount, you can access the mount controls from this one here, but I don't need to do that, so we're just going to go connect all. Okay, so we'll close that. So presuming that your mount and your guide scope is now connected, we can hit loop. Actually, I need to change that. Got the wrong simulator. I want this one. Okay, that's better. Now loop it, and bingo, you get a picture. Okay, so here's our stars. Now we're going to use one of these to guide on. So the first thing we're going to do is select a star, or you can go down to this button here which auto selects. The computer will pick out which is its best star it thinks, which is the same one I clicked anyway. And we just want to hit guide. And the first thing this is going to do, we don't worry about you can build a dark library if you want to, but don't need it for this. So this is now going to do its calibration, and then it will guide from that star. So this is where it works out how far your mount is going to move each pulse, and it calibrates its movements from that. So we'll just actually fast forward this part because it takes a little bit with this simulator to calibrate it, but when it's finished calibrating we'll come back. Okay, so now we've got it guiding. So we'll open up the graph, view and display the graph, and here we find our little graph. Now I'll just check the settings. You want this on pixels, RA dec, that's right. When it first starts it'll be on arc seconds. I'll turn that to pixels. Now here's obviously your graph. So how this reads is you have a north and south pulse, and you have the RA and the declination. Now the RA is the blue line and the declination is the red. Now these pulses, okay, north and south, are what control the tracking, and they keep the star aligned. So you want this line here, this line in the center, you want these guys to hover around that line. You don't want them to go too far up. So this is a simulator, so it's obviously tracks really well. So I've got it turned up to 1 pixel, okay, but most of the time you'll probably have it on 4, so that gives you 1 full pixel view each way. if you can keep these two lines, okay, within this one and this one, your tracking will be fine. So we'll just turn that up so that we can see it on this. Okay, now a bit of an explanation of these buttons down here. This is your RA aggression, hystosis, which goes with the way the RA runs. The minimum movement. So what this is it's the minimum movement before Phd2 will issue a guide pulse, radio. So it can move 0.16 of a pixel either way before Phd sends a pulse. Now the same thing here, the aggression. So RA aggression here, that decides how big a pulse the Phd2 is going to send. So when you first start out, the deck aggression will be 100, but for my telescope and my mount, I actually turn this down to about 45. So what the aggression does, it decides how big the pulses are going to be. Now the problem is, if your aggression's too high, what you'll get is you'll have a line like this where it's dropping down, and then it gets a big pulse like that, and it brings it right up here, which is way too far. Okay, you don't want it to bring it up that far. So what you do is you go to your declination aggression, and I'm going to put it on 50, like that. So that's half the aggression, the declination now. So next time it pulls this pulse up, see how it just got to the line and it stopped. So that's what you want to aim at. You want to get it so that when it pulses either north or south, the pulse comes back from this far point to this line. You don't want it to go over too far or stay under. Okay, so that's the objective, is to try and get these as close to this line as possible. So changing the declination aggression and the RA aggression will change change how much of a pulse Phd2 issues, and that way you can even out this line so you don't have fucking big zigzags all over the shop. So that's declination. Now, maximum declination is how big a pulse will PhD send. What's the biggest pulse it can send? And at the moment it's sent to 2500. So I'm going to turn that down to 100 just to show you what I mean. Now you'll see the size of these bars here. They represent the amount of pulse. So the next time this pulses, it can only do a maximum of 100. Okay, so here we go. So now it's going to pulse up. Now see this bar here, that's representing 100. See, it's 100. It won't pulse any more than 100. Okay, in either direction on the declination, because you've got the maximum set at 100. I usually set it at around 1000 because I don't like Phd to be able to send huge pulses because it's just not a great thing. But these are literally something you're going to have to fiddle with to fine tune how your mount works. So the objective is to get these two lines as close to the line in the middle as possible, and to do that you can up and down the declination. Now the minimum movement, like I've said, is the amount of movement on this graph before Phd will send a pulse. Now at the moment it's 0.16. Now that may be a bit close. Okay, so what I do with mine is I actually put the declination out probably about 25, so it's not continually popping it from one side to the next, issuing a lot of pulses. That the smaller the pulses that are sent, the less likely they are to be timed properly, and so you're going to get over pulses and under. So what you want is the least amount of pulses you can get away with. So you want to turn that down, turn the minimum movement up a little bit, and that way it will stop pinging quite as much either way. So for this I'm going to turn it back down so that we do get some pings. So now this button here that says auto, this button decides you can have it on auto, and in that case it will ping both north and south. It will pulse both north and south. You see these bars here going up to the north. that's the way it's been pulsing at the moment, simply because it hasn't needed to pulse south, but in auto it can pulse north and south. Now if you have a lot of backlash, what you'll find is it'll pulse north a couple of times and then it needs to pulse south. So when it pulses south, instead of just one pulse and a little bump, it actually starts to make a big mountain like this, goes right around like this shit. That's declination backlash, okay? And so the next time it pulses in the opposite direction, you get a mountain up on the top here as well, because it's going through all that backlash to get back to where it needs to be. Now there is a quick fix for that, in the sense that most of the time your mount will either roll to the north or to the south of this line, and often you can just put it on north, for instance. So doing that has just made it so that Phd will only issue guide pulses in the north direction. So these couple of souths here, it won't happen again. This will now only pulse north. See, here's the north pulse, which is bringing the declination back in up here. So it will keep pulsing north, but if it pops it up too high, it won't pulse south to bring it back, because that's where the declination issues come in, when it changes north and south. So if you've got really crap declination backlash, you can actually sort of soothe it out a bit with this. It is a rough fix, but if your mount is rolling primarily to the north, then you just pulse it south. If it's rolling primarily to the north, then, you know, to the south, then you pulse it north. And that's one way of actually getting rid of a lot of backlash issues. It's a dirty method. It's not the best idea, but it works for a while, until you can actually fine-tune your mount, because often this is actually in the mount itself. The gearing in the mount is not great, and therefore you're going to get a lot of backlash either way. Some mounts are that crap that you just can't get rid of that, and this is one way of actually sort of getting around it. Obviously, if you're tracking something all night and it changes side of the meridian, the chances are where the telescope was running to the north, once you've gone over the meridian, it'll probably turn around and run to the south. So you change this from north to south, and that changes the pulse direction again. And then it won't have that backlash, because it only ever pulses in one direction. Okay, but at the end of the day, you really want it on auto, so that it can pulse either way and keep the declination and the RA tracking well. But that's what those buttons do. It's a bit of an explanation for those. Okay, so what we're going to do is have a look at the settings here. Go back to global, dither settings. I'll talk about dithering in a minute. Camera should all be set up from when you initially did the setup. Now in guiding, this calibration steps here, once it's run, if you click advance, once you've calibrated it and run it for a bit, stop it, click on this, and it'll have a recommended calibration steps. Okay, so this is a size in millisteps, okay, or milliseconds of the calibration steps. So the higher the number, obviously the bigger the pulse is going to be, and after it's run a bit, it may actually decide that the initial number that it put here is wrong and will give you another one. And so if that number changes, you just hit OK, and that'll reset the calibration steps. Okay, so algorithms. Now this is your RA stuff here. As a general rule, your RA tracking should be reasonable, and you're probably not going to have to muck around with this much at all. The declination's where all the issues are going to be, as a general rule. Now this fast switch for large deflections, that can cause, it says that if you've got bad backlash to put that on, but I've actually found that with that on, if you have bad backlash, it can actually make it worse. You can use backlash compensation here, which is the same sort of thing on your SynScan mount. If you go into your settings, it's got a backlash compensation in there, and you can set the amount of seconds or in there for the backlash. So what backlash is the gearing in your mount, and some mounts, the gearing has a space in between the teeth. So as the teeth turn, they will turn and hit the cog and pulse south. Okay, so the cog starts turning south, but when the mount needs to pulse north, the problem is it's got to go, say, 3 or 4 pulses before the cog picks up the other cog and starts to actually physically move that cog again. That's where the backlash is. It's the bit in between where the tooth on your cogs actually have to move to engage the cog next to it. Now, the amount of movement in between each teeth is the amount of backlash you've got. If you've got no movement in between your teeth, then you have no backlash, obviously. But most mounts, so the cheaper ones anyway, certainly come with their own backlash issues. The only real way of fixing it is to literally pull them out, the declination screw apart, and physically make the gears come into contact. And you can find plenty of YouTube videos on how to do that. But that is something you're going to have to do if you have a lot of backlash issues. At the end of the day, it's the only way to fix it. Okay, so that's that set up. So yeah, I don't think you'd really need to change anything else in there. It's the aggression and stuff. It does have other ways of tracking and shit, but I've never seen anyone use any of these, so it's always resist switch. Hit OK. Okay, so if you adjust this exposure, so now you get a better start because it's on a second, but if you put it up to 0.5, okay, so now you're getting, it's going to come in quicker, okay, as you can see, but the star's worse off. But if you go back to view to graph and guide, this updates at the same speed, obviously, as the image, okay? So the quicker you can run this, the quicker Phd seems to operate and issue pulses and guide better. It really does. So if you can run it at 0.05, it seems to work better. It's not working here because it's just the SNR's dropping out, see? It's no good. But if you've got a real, this is only a simulator, in a real-time situation with a star that's reading well, that you can go down to 0.5 on, do that. So in this simulator, we've got to go back to 1 second. So now it's happy again. Now see how the pulses have slowed down? So you're only getting a reading every 1 second. I've thought about this a lot and I can't figure out how Phd could be running any faster than the exposure length, because it's not getting any data until it gets the exposure either. So it can only make a decision every 1 second on which way to guide. I might be wrong on this, but it certainly seems to be the case. So therefore, if you turn it up to 0.05, providing your star's bright enough, now it's making a decision every half a second, which seems to make, certainly for mine, it made my guiding twice as good when I can run it at 0.5 as opposed to 1 second. But that's just something I've noticed. Like I said, I'm not a programmer. I'm only reasonably new to this myself, so yeah, I'm not exactly sure about that, but it certainly does seem to make a difference. So if you can turn it up to 0.5 or even faster, as long as you've got the good SNR, it seems to work better. So yeah, I think that's about all really. Certainly that's all you need to do a bit of fine tuning. Now, if this really is your first time using this, don't even think about taking photos on your first go. Just try to get the guiding right. Spend a night just fiddling around trying to get these two lines as close to this as you can. And once you've got that, it stores the settings and you're right. So you pretty much only have to stuff around with all these numbers, you know, a little bit, and get it tracking right, and then it's generally fairly close. You generally don't have to fiddle with these too much after that. But I always do, if you find that it's, like I said, if it's jumping up too far, turn the declination down a little bit. If it's not popping it up far enough, turn it up a little bit. It's all a matter of frigging around with these until you can smooth this line out as much as possible. And that's literally all there is to it. Okay, just to clarify a few things. This button here, it only controls the direction of your declination pulses, not your RA. So your RA is the blue line, and I've been basically talking about your declination because most of your problems are going to be with your declination. Now, you're going to have three things that are going to affect your tracking. Okay, the first one's your polar alignment. You're not going to get any tracking at all unless your polar alignment is reasonably close. Okay, if it's off, you forget about it. The second one is the backlash. Rightio, so if you've got really bad backlash, again, you're going to have a lot of issues like I went through before. You really do have to pull your mount apart and fix that properly. And the third is a balance, and balance is one of the most important things. What you'll find if you've got balance issues is you'll get it tracking okay. You look at it and you go, man, that's great, that's tracking beautiful. I'll just leave that, go and have a beer. And then it's got to do a meridian flip. It does the meridian flip, and all of a sudden the tracking's all over the place. So as a general rule, what that is your balance is out. So it's calibrated with the weight on one side of the gearing, and when it's done a meridian flip, the weight of the telescope is now on the other side of the gearing, and that's actually put the calibration out because the backlash is now in reverse as such. So if you recalibrate it at that point, you'll probably get it working okay again because it'll adjust to the balance issue. But at the end of the day, you really do need to have good balance. So spend some time with your telescope, get it balanced, and half your issues are going to disappear straight away. Polar alignment, again, you've got to have a reasonable polar alignment, or obviously your RA and your deck are going to be both like pulsing in all sorts of bloody directions trying to correct for it. So that's the other biggest issue. And of course the backlash. Now if you're like me, you've only got cheap gear. It's an expensive game, this, and I just haven't got a lot of money. So my mount, I bought a Saxon go-to mount for $1,200, and the backlash in it was so bad that I almost put it in the shed. You know, I spent $1,200, and that's a lot of money for a bloke like me. I know it's not much money in this game, but $1,200, and it was fucking unusable for astrophotography. Great just for looking through, but for astrophotography, no good at all. So I actually had to pull the worm gearing out and fix that. You'll probably find if you've got a cheap setup, you're going to have to do a similar sort of thing. Now, I've got some really good results now that I've got my head around this thing. My gear seems to work as good as the expensive stuff. I can track for 10, 15, 20 minutes. But it took a lot more friggin' round. Like if you've got the expensive gear, you plug it in and most of it will work pretty well straight off. But if you're, like I said, and I know I'm rattling on, but if you've got the cheaper end, you're going to have to fiddle around with it a lot. Don't give up because it's really worth it. Once you've got all this shit sorted, it's literally only 5 minutes to set the telescope up, 5 minutes to align it, 5 minutes to decide what you're doing, and you're taking photos. It's just that's getting to that stage where most people give up and put it in the shed. So I really hope this has helped. It's probably a bit long-winded, but that's me. So clear skies, guys, and I hope you have fun.